Welcome to the online class. Hello, dear learners. How are you? I think you all are keeping well by the grace of Almighty Allah. I am also fine. This is Hasina Islam, lecturer, Department of English, Tonkin Government College, Gazipur. This lecture is for the students of honors 4th year. This is the second lecture on the novel To the Lighthouse. In my previous lecture, I have given you uh, the idea of some characters, important characters, and also some analysis of this novel. Today, I am going to give you a short summary and also the character-wise, analysis of this novel. So, let's start. In this novel, the novel recalls childhood emotion and highlights adult relationship. Among the book's many tropes and themes are those of loss, subjectivity, the nature of art, and the problem of perception. In 1998, actually at this time, when the story was written, this story highlighted of the after effect of the First World War. So this novel recollects the childhood emotions, okay? And the lighthouse actually symbolizes human desire, a force that pulses over the indifferent sea of natural world. Actually, it symbolizes the desire, human desire, that is to say something, their desire to know something, okay, and to discover the real truth, okay. So this novel is written by Virginia Woolf in 1927, and the story centers on members of the Ramsey family and their trips to their holiday home in the Isle of Skye over the course of decades. They started their vacation in their holiday home, and it is in Scotland. So the novel tells the story through the use of a stream of consciousness of various characters in the novel, which is the method Woolf uses to present their reflections on their memories. Actually, here we find the recollection of memories, ideas of various characters. So Mrs. Ramsey embraces conventional gender roles as a wife. That is, she is a very ideal housewife, and she tries herself to do whatever needed for her family. Okay, so she is the mother and a hostess to her friends visiting her house. She is a support to her family and friends, and believes that marriage and having children constitute the only fitting path to take for a woman. That is, she thinks that all these things, only family, children, these things are fit for women. So Lily Briscoe, this character, she is a painter, and Lily Briscoe is a friend of Ramsey family. Mrs. Ramsey and Lily do not share the same beliefs about the role of women, because Mrs. Ramsey believes in the to make household activities, and she is happy with all these types of activities. But Lily Briscoe is different, okay. So Lily is an artist. She thinks that a woman can be more than just a wife or a mother, and wants a career as a painter primarily. Actually, she wants to paint, and she was trying to make paintings. So Mr. Tansley, a friend of the family, believes that women cannot write or paint. Lily's is hurt by his comment, but motivated to prove him wrong. Actually, this man discouraged him. Okay, but on knowing that Lily Briscoe was motivated, and she tried her best to finish her painting. During Lily's stay with the Ramsey family, Lily begins to paint a portrait of Mrs. Ramsey and her son James, and thereby proves that a woman could paint and write since she finishes her painting at the end of the novel. So at the end of the novel, we find that she could able to end her picture, finishes her picture, the picture of Mrs. Ramsay. Okay, so Mrs. Ramsay is, however, more interested in marrying Lily to William Banks, a friend of the family. So Mrs. Ramsay tries herself to, marry in marrying Lily to William. Okay, so because Lily is 34 and not conventionally attractive, actually she had Chinese eyes and she was not so attractive. So Mrs. Ramsay's comment about Lily's physical appearance supports the practice of objectifying women, reducing them to their looks and their role as merely housewives. Okay, so here we also find the physical description of her friend. Okay, so Wolf herself, actually here Virginia Woolf wants to show something more. Okay, so Woolf herself was a feminist and she resembles the character of Lilies in the novel. Actually she presents herself in the guise of Lily. Actually she wants to express herself like Lily. Okay, as a child, Wolf's father didn't believe in girls going to school, which limited Wolf and her sisters from having a conventional education from school. However, they were given access to their father's library and were encouraged to read and write as children. Okay, so in this way, they got their education. So Mrs. Ramsay comes to agree with her husband even when his ideas and reactions seem inadequate, again supporting the idea of women being second-class citizens. Okay, so Mr. Ramsay's action, Mr. Ramsay, he's a philosopher. So Mr. Ramsay's actions are often validated by his wife. Mr. Ramsay needs his wife's attention and reassurance to feel good about himself and to maintain his role as the head of the family. So this is the role played by Mr. Ramsay. Okay, so who and Mrs. Ramsay, she plays only the secondary role, and Mr. Ramsay is the head of the family. So now I'm going to give you the short summary. You have to listen to this very carefully. Okay, so Mrs. Ramsay and Mr. Ramsay, a philosopher, they have 8 children, and several guests are staying at the family summer home in the Hebrides. It is in the Scotland. Actually, they were enjoying their summer vacation in that farmhouse on the Isle of Skye just before the start of World War One. That is, the story begins just before the First World War. Just across the bay is a lighthouse which becomes a prominent presence in the family's life. James Ramsay, the youngest child, wants to go to the lighthouse. Actually, there was a lighthouse very near to the house, and James, the youngest child, wants to go there. Okay, so they want to go on the next day, but Mr. Ramsay crashes his hopes, saying that the weather will not be pleasant enough for the trip. Actually, the weather was not so pleasant, and he doesn't want to go to the lighthouse. And at this, James becomes very angry, and he resents his father for his insensitivity and as well as for his emotional demands on Mrs. Ramsay. And is this resentment, actually he was very angry and he was very disappointed. That is James Ramsay. Okay, so the house guests include Lily Briscoe, an unmarried painter who begins a portrait of Mrs. Ramsay. I have said it earlier. Then there were a few guests in their summer house. That is Lily Briscoe, Charles Transley, who is not very well liked, and then William Banks, and who Mrs. Ramsay wants Lily to marry, but Lily never does, and Paul Ramsay, Paul Raleigh, and Minta Dwell, who become engaged during their visit. So all these persons are guests of their family. Okay, So Mrs. Ramsay spends the afternoon reading to James as Lily watches her from the lawn, attempting to paint her portrait. Mr. Ramsay also watches her as he walks and worries about his intellectual shortcomings, afraid that he will never achieve greatness. Actually, at that time, Lily was painting the picture of Mrs. Ramsay, and she was following her. And Mr. Ramsay, he is a traditional husband. And then Andrew Ramsay, Nancy Ramsay, Paul, Riley, and Minta Doyle take a walk on the beach where Paul proposed to Minta. And by this time, we find that this person, they were uh, taking a walk on the beach, and at that time, Paul proposes to Minta. For the evening, Mrs. Ramsay has planned a dinner for 15 guests. There were 15 guests, and she planned for a dinner, including Augustus Carmichael, a friend and poet. The dinner guests off to a shaky start as Mr. Ramsay becomes angry with Mr. Carmichael, and for requesting more soup, and no one seems to be enjoying the conversation. At that time, Mr. Ramsay was very annoyed, and however, at a certain magical moment, everyone in the room seems to connect, and Mrs. Ramsay hopes that something permanent will result from this connection. Following dinner, Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay sit together in the parlor, and Mrs. Ramsay finds that she unable to tell her husband that she loves him. Actually, she could not express. Okay, she was feeling very shy, and she could not express herself. Nevertheless, though their unspoken communication, she is sure that he knows. Actually, she could not, expose herself. Okay, in the second section of the novel, time passes. Actually, this novel is divided into three sections. First one is the window. Second one, the time passes, and it goes very shortly. In the second section of the novel, time passes. The house is abandoned for 10 years. Actually, they could not visit this house for 10 years because at the time, First World was going on, and several changes taking place, and at that time they could not visit this place. Okay, so suffering the ravages of time, neglect, and decay, Mrs. Ramsay unexpectedly dies on night, as does Pro in an illness treated related to childbirth. Andrew is the third Ramsay to die when he is killed in his tenaciously in battle. And Mrs. McNabb goes to the house occasionally to tidy it up and restore it, but it is not until she hears word that the remaining Ramsays will be returning for the summer that she gets everything in order. That is Mrs. McNabb. He arranges the house, the summer house, but for last 10 years they were not visiting this place, and a huge change took place by this time. Though it is here we find a very short description, but the time passes very quickly. Okay, in the lighthouse, that is at the last section entitled as the lighthouse. That is first section is entitled as the window, then the second one is the second one is then the third one is the lighthouse. Okay, the second section is time passes, and third one is lighthouse. Okay, so in the lighthouse, it is the last part of this novel. Okay, so all of the living Ramses as well as other guests, including Lily Briscoe, return to the summer home. Mr. Ramsay decides that James, and Cam Ramsay will finally take the trip to the lighthouse. Actually, James, when he was a young boy, wanted to see the lighthouse, but he couldn't go there. So it was a dream to him to visit the lighthouse. But so many years have passed, 10 years have passed, and they became adult. Now they planned to trip to the lighthouse. But the children are resentful of his domineering manner. Like actually, his father was very dominating character. He is angry about delays on the morning of the trip, and he approaches Lily for sympathy, but she is unable to feel any sympathy for him until he has already set off on the journey when it is too late. Just as Mr. Ramsay decides to finally take this journey, Lily Briscoe decides to finally finish the painting that she started 10 years ago. She started the painting of Mrs. Ramsay, and she completed it by this 10 years. Okay, so this last part, that is the lighthouse, it is a settlement actually. Lily got his power to to make his portrait, and the other characters of this family, those who were willing to see the lighthouse, they got the chance to see the lighthouse. So on the board, the children continue to resent their father's self-pity, yet as the ship approaches the lighthouse, they find a new tenderness for and connection to him. As the boat reaches its destination, Lily paints the final stroke of her canvas and finally achieves her vision. Actually, here in the last part, at the end of this part, the writer wants to show the show that women can also draw, women can make pictures, and the dream came true, that is those characters who wanted to visit the light. This is, all these are symbolically represented. Okay, so you have to go through the deep analysis of this novel, and in my next lecture I will try to give you another topic. I will try to start another topic. Until then, Allah Hafiz, have a nice day.